When a Sigma male pulls away, it never happens by accident. And it never happens without meaning. People think he's just busy or in his own world, but they don't realize they're watching the beginning of a quiet transformation. His distance is deliberate. It's a shift in energy, in perception, in what he's willing to tolerate. And the moment he steps back, the entire dynamic around him starts to change. The people who took him for granted begin to feel the absence. The ones who depended on his emotional stability suddenly lose their anchor. The ones who underestimated him realize they never understood him at all. His silence becomes a mirror, reflecting truths they never wanted to see. This video will walk you through the 8 psychological changes that unfold when a Sigma pulls away. Changes that affect his mindset, his boundaries, his future, and the people who once had access to him. If you've ever wondered why his withdrawal feels so sudden, so final, or so powerful, you're about to understand the full blueprint behind it. And if you click away early, you'll miss the core reason why a Sigma's distance is never a reaction. It's a recalibration. Before we start, answer this in the comments. Have you ever pulled away and watched everything around you reveal itself? Drop the word shifted if you're ready, and subscribe to Ultra Wise so you don't miss the deeper layers of this transformation. He stops absorbing other people's emotions and reconnects with his own clarity. When a Sigma male pulls away, the first shift happens inside him, long before anyone else senses it. He stops absorbing the emotional weight of the room, the unspoken tensions, the silent expectations, the moods people project onto him. For a long time, he carried these things without noticing. He felt responsible for maintaining peace, for stabilizing chaos, for being the calm center in every storm. But the moment he steps back, something becomes clear. Those emotions were never his to hold. As soon as that realization hits, the fog begins to lift. The voices, opinions, and emotional demands that once clouded his mind fade into the background. He hears himself again, his intuition, his logic, his truth, and it strikes him how quiet his inner world becomes once he stops carrying everyone else's noise. This clarity doesn't arrive gently. It's sharp, revealing the emotional overload he tolerated for far too long. He notices how drained he felt after certain conversations, how tense he became in certain environments, how often he sacrificed his peace to avoid disappointing others. Distance gives him perspective, and perspective gives him honesty. He begins to see that absorbing others' emotions wasn't empathy. It was self-neglect disguised as strength, and while he was busy maintaining everyone else's balance, his own balance was slipping. So he cuts the invisible cords, tying him to other people's emotional storms. He stops reacting to their mood swings, stops internalizing their fears, stops taking responsibility for feelings that were never his burden. With each layer of emotional weight he releases, he feels his mind sharpen. Thoughts become cleaner. Decisions become easier. His intuition becomes louder. He reconnects with a part of himself he nearly forgot, the man who sees clearly without interference, who thinks independently without pressure, who feels deeply without drowning in others' chaos. The world around him hasn't changed, but he has. His withdrawal becomes the doorway to mental freedom, and people around him notice something different. The calm they once took from him is no longer freely available. Once he reconnects with his clarity, everything else follows. His boundaries, his choices, his direction. Because the Sigma male becomes strongest the moment he stops absorbing what drains him and starts hearing what strengthens him. He becomes hyper-observant, studying patterns he ignored when he was invested. When a Sigma male pulls away, his perception shifts into a mode most people never experience. The emotional fog that once blurred his judgment clears, and suddenly every detail, every tone, every hesitation, every repeated behavior becomes visible with startling precision. When he was invested, he gave people the benefit of the doubt. He overlooked inconsistencies, softened the edges of red flags, and focused on intentions instead of outcomes. But distance turns his emotional lens into a strategic one. He starts seeing not what people say, but what they do. And the truth in that contrast becomes impossible to unsee. His mind becomes a quiet observatory. He watches how people act when they no longer receive his attention. He notices who reaches out only when they need something, who becomes distant without his effort holding the connection together, who grows uncomfortable when their influence over him fades. Patterns that were invisible before now appear like bold handwriting on a blank page. He recognizes cycles he tolerated, manipulation disguised as concern, inconsistency masked as confusion, disrespect softened by apologies. With space between him and the world, he analyzes these behaviors without emotional interference. He sees who drains him, who supports him, who matches his energy, and who only takes from it. What makes this shift powerful is that it happens silently. No confrontation, no explanations, no warnings. He simply watches and learns. He picks up on motives buried beneath words, detects entitlement hidden inside jokes, senses insecurity behind sudden anger. If someone lies, he catches the smallest changes in rhythm. If someone hides resentment, he hears it in the spaces between their sentences. If someone's loyalty is conditional, he feels the temperature shift before they even speak. The Sigma becomes a mirror that reflects people back to themselves, revealing truths they never meant to show. This hyper-observance is not pettiness. It's survival. It's clarity. It's the moment he evaluates whether a connection still deserves a place in his life. And once he finishes studying the patterns he once ignored, his decisions become final. He doesn't react. He doesn't argue. He simply adjusts his distance to match the truth he has uncovered. And when a Sigma male understands someone's patterns fully, that person will never again have the power to surprise him or control him. He withdraws his energy, revealing who valued him and who only valued his availability. When a Sigma male quietly pulls back his energy, the shift is subtle at first. A silence here, a delayed response there, a missing presence that people once took for granted. But beneath that subtlety lies a profound test of the connections around him. For years he may have been the listener, the problem solver, the stabilizer, the one who held space for others without asking for much in return. People grow comfortable with that kind of steady presence. Some even begin to believe it will always be available. But the Sigma knows when his energy is no longer respected, and when he withdraws it, the truth about everyone around him rises to the surface. As his energy fades from the dynamic, the people who genuinely valued him feel the shift immediately. They reach out, not for what he can give, but because they sense something in him has changed. Their concern is quiet, sincere, and free of expectation. They don't demand explanations. They simply want to make sure he's okay. These few reveal themselves without trying. Their loyalty is natural, not strategic. But the others, the ones who depended on his emotional labor, his presence, his steadiness, react very differently. Some grow irritated, even offended, because the source of comfort they once relied on is no longer within easy reach. They interpret his withdrawal as defiance, not evolution. The tone of their messages shifts from friendly to possessive. They ask why he's distant, not because they care, but because they miss the convenience he provided. Others don't reach out at all, and their silence reveals everything. Without his attention fueling the relationship, they have nothing to gain, so they simply disappear. The Sigma's absence exposes the hollowness of their connection. As days turn into weeks, the truth becomes unmistakable. He sees who valued him, his mind, his presence, his character, and who only valued the benefits of having him around. This is the revelation that changes everything. Once he recognizes the difference, he will never again invest in those who only noticed him when he was giving. By withdrawing his energy, he doesn't punish anyone. He clarifies the landscape of his relationships. He discovers who stands beside him because they choose to, and who stood there only because he made it easy. And once that truth reveals itself, a Sigma male never forgets it. He rebuilds his boundaries, tightening access to protect his peace and direction. When a Sigma male begins to pull away, the first thing he reconstructs is the perimeter around his life, the invisible line that defines who may enter and who must remain outside. This boundary was once flexible because he believed in giving people chances, in assuming good intentions, in allowing access with the hope that others would respect it. But experience has taught him that not everyone deserves the softness of his availability or the strength of his attention. So he retreats, not out of fear or bitterness, but to rebuild the walls that were eroded by years of overextending himself. His withdrawal becomes the blueprint for a new structure, one designed with clarity instead of emotional obligation. As the boundary takes shape, the change in his behavior feels subtle yet decisive. He no longer entertains conversations that go nowhere, nor does he keep people close simply because they have history with him. Instead, he asks himself a question he once avoided. Does this person contribute to my peace or take from it? The answer becomes the filter through which every interaction passes. Those who drain him find the doors slowly closing, not with drama or confrontation, but with quiet, consistent distance. He simply stopped giving them the emotional shortcuts they relied on. Access becomes earned, not assumed. At the same time, his inner world grows sharper and more intentional. With fewer distractions tugging at his energy, he can hear his own thoughts clearly again. He can feel the difference between genuine connection and tolerated presence. He begins prioritizing purpose over obligation, and for the first time in a long time, his decisions align fully with his values. He no longer lets guilt persuade him or familiarity trap him. His boundaries reflect the man he is becoming, not the man he used to be for others. Those who truly respect him adjust without resistance. They understand that growth requires solitude and strength requires protection. Their presence remains steady because it was never dependent on access, but on mutual respect. But those who once benefited from his openness feel the loss immediately. They sense the shift, the tightening, the quiet restructuring of his inner circle, and they realize they no longer have the influence they once enjoyed. By rebuilding his boundaries, the Sigma male doesn't close himself off from the world. He simply ensures that only the right people can walk beside him. And once these boundaries are set with intention, they become unshakable, protecting not only his peace, but the direction of the man he is evolving into. He shifts from emotional involvement to strategic thinking, seeing the situation without attachment. When a Sigma male pulls away, something profound happens inside him. The emotional fog that once blurred his judgment begins to lift. He stops feeling the situation and starts studying it. What once tugged at his heart no longer pulls with the same force. Instead, his mind becomes the dominant lens through which he sees everything. Moments that once stirred confusion or frustration now appear like clear patterns on a map. He traces behaviors, analyzes responses, replays conversations not to reopen wounds, but to understand motives. It's as if someone turned on a bright light in a room he lived in for years without realizing how dim it had become. He no longer reacts instinctively, he processes with intention. This shift is not coldness, it is clarity. Emotional involvement once made him generous with excuses, patient with inconsistencies, and forgiving toward patterns that should have never been ignored. When he was invested, he absorbed the emotional weight of every interaction, carrying burdens that were never his to hold. But detachment changes the equation. He no longer looks at people through the lens of hope or potential. He looks at them through their actions, through what they consistently choose, through what they reveal when they think he isn't paying attention. Distance turns him into a strategist, not a participant. He steps out of the emotional turbulence and studies the currents from the shore. As he observes without attachment, the truth becomes unavoidable. He notices the subtle manipulations that once blended into the background. He sees the expectations others placed on him disguised as affection. He recognizes the imbalance between what he gave and what he received. And in that clarity, he begins reclaiming the power he didn't realize he had handed away. No one's reaction has the ability to pull him back into emotional chaos. No one's disappointment can guilt him into staying where he no longer belongs. His mind becomes his compass, and he follows it with unwavering precision. This transformation is what makes his withdrawal so final. Once he thinks strategically, he stops fighting for people who would never fight for him. He stops explaining, hoping, or negotiating. He makes decisions based not on emotion, but on alignment, on what strengthens him, protects him, and elevates him. And those who once relied on his emotional involvement to influence him suddenly find themselves powerless. Because when a Sigma sees the situation without attachment, he doesn't simply change his perspective, he changes his entire direction. He regains his autonomy, remembering he never needed the connection to feel whole. When a Sigma male pulls away, the first thing he rediscovers is himself. Not the version shaped by the connection, not the man stretched thin by emotional responsibility, but the core of who he has always been: independent, self-sufficient, grounded. As the emotional noise fades, the space around him becomes wide again, open, breathable. He realizes how much of his internal landscape had been occupied by someone else's expectations, moods, needs, and inconsistency. And in that quiet, he remembers a truth he once lived effortlessly. He never needed anyone to complete him. He chooses people, but he does not rely on them to define him. The reconnection with autonomy feels like returning to a forgotten home. He recalls the strength he built long before the connection existed, the discipline that carried him through solitude, the clarity he sharpened in silence, the internal compass that has always pointed him toward purpose. Emotional involvement had dimmed that compass, not because he was weak, but because he cared. Now, as he pulls his energy back into himself, all the parts that were scattered by emotional investment begin to realign with precision. His identity becomes whole again, not fragmented by compromise or diluted by trying to maintain balance with someone who could not meet him at the same depth. This rediscovered autonomy changes the way he sees everything. The connection that once felt essential suddenly appears optional, even unnecessary. Not because he is bitter, not because he is cold, but because he recognizes that he was always complete before anyone entered his life. He does not walk away wounded, he walks away restored. When he regains autonomy, he stops negotiating his worth through the eyes of others. He stops trying to prove, fix, chase, or maintain. He no longer fears losing someone because he remembers that he cannot lose what he does not depend on. His strength returns to its natural state, quiet, firm, and unshakable. And with that autonomy comes a deeper truth. He realizes how much he gave, how much he tolerated, how much he carried that was never reciprocated. He sees that the connection survived because he kept it alive. Now, without his energy feeding it, it fades effortlessly, revealing its true fragility. This clarity does not make him resentful, it makes him free. Because a Sigma male who regains his autonomy becomes untouchable. He remembers who he is, and once that happens, no connection can ever own him again. He redirects his focus towards self-elevation, using distance as fuel for growth. When a Sigma male steps back, the world assumes he is retreating, but in reality, he is sharpening. What looks like distance from the outside is actually a shift inward, a reallocation of energy from emotional maintenance to personal evolution. The moment he pulls away, he stops feeding the connection and starts feeding his mind, his craft, his purpose. It is not an escape. It is a recalibration. The noise that once clouded his decisions fades, and in the silence that follows, he begins to rebuild the parts of himself that were neglected when he was giving more than he received. Distance becomes the clean air he breathes, the clarity that returns, the spark that reignites his ambition. This redirection of focus is not dramatic or loud. It is calculated. He revisits goals he set aside, passions he dimmed, and standards he lowered for the sake of peace. Now, with emotional weight lifted, he can think clearly, act decisively, and move with the intention he lost while trying to support someone who could not match his depth. He remembers the projects he wanted to start, the discipline he once lived by, the version of himself he was becoming before emotional entanglement disrupted his trajectory. And with every day of distance, he takes one step further into that evolution. His routines tighten, his vision sharpens, his ambition rises. What once drained him now fuels him, because he refuses to waste the space he created. Growth for a Sigma is not a performance. It is transformation disguised as quiet effort. People who once underestimated him will begin to notice subtle but undeniable changes. Stronger boundaries, deeper focus, sharper intuition, and a level of self-control that makes him unreachable to the chaos he left behind. He does not move to prove anyone wrong. He moves to fulfill what he knows he is capable of. Distance becomes a mirror that shows him where he was held back, and more importantly, how far he can go without those restraints. And as he elevates, something powerful happens. The emotional pull that once tied him to the situation dissolves. His energy is reinvested entirely into himself, leaving no space for regret or longing. He grows into someone the old connection can no longer reach, influence, or diminish. Because when a Sigma male redirects his focus towards self-elevation, he doesn't return as the same man. He returns stronger, sharper, and too far ahead for anyone to catch. He reaches a point of emotional finality where returning is no longer an option. There comes a moment in a Sigma male's withdrawal where something inside him shifts, quietly, permanently, with a certainty that feels like a door locking from the inside. People often mistake his silence for hesitation, assuming he is merely taking time to cool down or reflect. But they misunderstand the nature of his distance. He does not drift back and forth, nor does he linger in emotional limbo. Once he reaches that internal threshold, that place where clarity replaces attachment, the connection dissolves completely. Not loudly, not angrily, but with a calm finality that leaves no crack open for reconciliation. It is not revenge. It is not punishment. It is the natural outcome of a man who has examined the situation from every angle and found no reason, no benefit, no alignment worthy of returning. This emotional finality arrives only after deep internal processing. A Sigma does not cut ties impulsively. He observes the patterns, weighs the intentions, evaluates the impact on his peace and purpose. And when the evidence becomes undeniable, when the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore, he stops trying to repair what was draining him. At that point, the emotional cord snaps, cleanly and without regret. He does not look back, because there is nothing left behind that aligns with who he is or who he is becoming. The bond that once held meaning now feels foreign, outgrown, irrelevant. He evolves past it, the same way a tree sheds leaves that can no longer sustain it. Geno a million. This transformation is internal, but its effects are absolute. Even if the other person returns with apologies, promises, or nostalgia, they are speaking to a previous version of him, a version that no longer exists. Emotional finality for a Sigma means he has reorganized his inner world in a way that no longer includes the connection. The feelings that once tied him to someone fade into neutrality, and neutrality is a place from which he never rebuilds. He doesn't hate, he doesn't resent, he doesn't yearn. He simply moves on, entirely, permanently, and with a peace that cannot be negotiated. And the most striking part is this: people often realize the door is truly closed only when they try to reopen it. They expect hesitation, softness, or a lingering attachment. Instead, they find silence. Not the silence of contemplation, but the silence of completion. Because once a Sigma male reaches emotional finality, returning is not only unlikely, it is impossible. When a Sigma pulls away and reaches that irreversible point of emotional finality, the story doesn't end with anger or noise. It ends with a man choosing himself over confusion, over imbalance, over anything that slows down his evolution. That quiet exit becomes the moment he steps into a higher version of himself, one that no longer waits to be understood, appreciated, or chosen. And if there's one truth people learn too late, it's this: when a Sigma closes a chapter, he doesn't bookmark the page, he writes a new book entirely. If this breakdown helped you see the deeper psychology behind a Sigma's withdrawal, ask yourself something honestly. Have you ever reached a point in your life where going back was no longer an option, even if others expected you to? Drop a single word in the comments: finality. It tells me you watched to the end and that you're part of this inner circle that understands the Sigma path. Subscribe to Ultrawise if you want more content that cuts through illusions and reveals the truth behind silent strength, self-mastery, and psychological evolution.